Hello there, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This is episode number 85 with Vadim Revzin, who is doing a lot of different cool stuff, but is just a serial entrepreneur, has that mindset of just doing a lot of cool different work, and is currently focused on School 16, which is helping enable people with in-demand skills to get really great career outcomes. So it's an education company, and he founded it very recently to really try to meet the needs of our current pandemic and helping people kind of reskill for in-demand jobs that they can kind of get gainful employment from. And he also hosts his own podcast. He teaches at NYU and has just done a lot of really cool different things. So we explore that journey, what he's geeking out about, and a lot of great stuff for you to check out in the show notes for this episode. So thanks so much to Vadim for his time and for you for listening. But without further ado, this is episode number 85 with Vadim Revzin. Cool. Well, then we'll go ahead and get started. Really appreciate you taking some time for the podcast here. And if you just want to kind of start us off as we always do, with just giving a brief introduction of yourself and your professional journey of how you got to be where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Vadim Revzin. I am a professor at NYU and State University of New York. I'm also the founder of School 16, which is an education company, and I host my own podcast with my twin brother called The Mentors. How did I get to this path? Really backwards journey, actually. I didn't know, like many people, exactly what I wanted to do after college. And so I followed the path that my parents, who of course meant the best for me, prescribed to me, which was, well, you're either going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. And then I said, well, I don't really want to be any of those things, so maybe I'll just go into finance, which they were satisfied with because that usually meant that you'd have a stable job. But within a few years of being in that industry, I realized it's just not for me. And what I always loved about my parents and is that they always supported my decisions, even though there was a lot of trepidation. I did graduate into the 2008 economy, which had its own issues. They eventually supported me, and I decided to get into startups because I wanted to be where innovation was. And I've held a bunch of different roles in startups, sales, product, sales engineering, business development. I have worked at early and growth stage startups. I had my own startup companies in different industries. And eventually, once I started to advise startups myself after getting a bunch of experience, I realized I really liked the education side of things. And it started with one-on-one education, actually advising early stage startups at a couple of seed funds. And then it went into getting opportunities to teach at the university level.
Yeah, very cool. So I guess I'm curious because, like you have done kind of the serial entrepreneur journey and like doing all these different things. And if it's any just maybe like core values or people that you've met, like building your network or any of those kind of things, I'm just curious, like kind of at that core kind of stage where a lot of people are, learning and growing and kind of finding themselves and all that, for you in college, like, are there any experiences or any kind of anecdotes that you can think of that like are still really impactful and like resonate for you personally and or professionally that you'd want to share?
Absolutely. So I transferred colleges actually with my twin brother, Sergey, right in the middle of my college career. I went to a very small Catholic school only because they gave me a scholarship, and I realized that I was constrained there. It almost felt like I was in a bubble and I didn't have access to the world. That's the best way I can explain that feeling. A good school, but not for me. And so I decided I wanted to go to a business school. That's when I started getting excited about entrepreneurialism. I didn't really even probably use that word, but I knew that I wanted to be in that environment. And I ended up getting into a business school. And literally within the first week of being in that school, I noticed a big difference. And the biggest difference was half of my roommates had their own businesses. One of them was actually running a company that was covering all of his college tuition. So he was making significant revenue already in college, and he had started in high school. There was a huge international student community within the university. So people coming from all sorts of various backgrounds, where I was used to a more homogenous sort of experience and surrounding. And those people came from various, industries as well. I should say their families did. And so they had a lot of exposure to different industries, different businesses, different ways of life. And a lot of those people were starting companies as well. And the mentality shifted right away, not only because of the classes I'd be now taking at this business school, but probably more so because of the people that I was surrounded by. And I I went into the mode of I need to start my own thing right away. And that's actually when I started my first company. It failed horribly, but I started my first business in college.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so I guess yeah, kind of being inspired by others, getting that seed planted for that sort of that. I don't know. I guess because I guess like so many people do kind of maybe wish to do that, or they kind of have these ideas that maybe they don't pursue. But if you kind of had that catalyst that just really helped you, which it seems like partially was just like seeing other people be able to do it, so it doesn't seem kind of so kind of mystical and kind of elusive. So yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's kind of two schools of thought. Either you're born entrepreneurial or you're not. I was lucky enough to, I think maybe I was born with a gene, but I was also lucky enough to grow up in a family that placed values on experimenting, placed values on getting outside your comfort zone, everything that's important if you want to start your own business. And so that was a burning desire inside of me that I couldn't ignore. As children, we want to experiment. We want to try new things. We're curious about the world. And in some ways, the education system fails us a little bit in that scenario because we're put on a very different path. We're typically put on a path that is designed to, in some ways, expose you to different skills, possibly, or different environments, but in many ways to set you up for a stable career, to set you up to be a good contributor to, organizations, let's say. And that kind of goes against, I think, a lot of our nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, now I'm interested, I guess, we'll kind of transition to what you're currently doing now. So I think kind of, I guess, the first and foremost, and we'll, I think, get to some of the other stuff too, like your podcast and your teaching and all that. But kind of first and foremost, School 16, I know, is what you're spending a lot of your time on right now, in addition to those other things. So I guess just kind of giving a little bit more context to that, of maybe just how it started and what you do, and kind of just like what you enjoy most about it, and then we'll kind of get to some of the other stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. So School 16 originally started as a way for me to formalize how I help entrepreneurs, because I, again, had been advising and I had been a mentor to a bunch of early stage startups, but I wanted to create some more formal programs similar to what I had created for the classes that I teach at the university level, but making it available to a broader set of population, right? Because not everybody can afford to get into a great college or university. And also there's a lot of adult learners out there for whom that's just not a viable step, but they may be thinking, okay, the next step in my career is I want to start my own thing. So I wanted to create a resource for them. And that was the driving force. But of course, in lieu of recent events, I actually started to kind of shift my thinking around this a little bit. And what I saw a need around, even from the early stage entrepreneurs that I was talking to, is that feeling of security that we talked about before. I mean, if you want to start your own business, you have to feel like you're on a good footing. A lot of people, that's why they do it while they have full-time jobs. People don't know, for example, that Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, he actually worked on Nike on the side for over a decade while being an accountant. Until he actually committed to it full time. He had staff and everything, but he didn't transition full time until he was comfortable. And so people do need to feel comfortable in order to start their own thing, in order to commit those resources on the side. And so I realized that right now, especially as we're seeing the unemployment rates rise to a level that we don't know where it will go to, and to an unprecedented level, I realized that there's more of a need right now than ever for people to build their skills, develop their skills to be more marketable in the job market. And a lot of people that want to maybe even start their own companies or not, they don't have the opportunity like you and I do to sit in front of a computer and do our work every day. They don't necessarily have that flexibility. And that light bulb went off for me just a few weeks ago. And I decided what I want to do is I want to provide people with with whatever value I could give them. And because I've changed my career so many times, and because I was able to transition into tech, which is an industry that is historically much more flexible and more resilient as well. Of course, people are still losing jobs in tech right now too, but it is one of those industries that will come back first. I decided to create School 16 for that. And right now, sort of the first version of the program is completely free because we don't want to have any friction for anybody that wants to learn. And we're offering free live online classes with people from different roles in tech, talking about exactly what skills you need to develop to get those roles and what skills are in high demand. And what's most rewarding for me there is when a student or a participant when you see that aha moment for them, when a light bulb goes off, when they get some more clarity in what they want to do with their life, because we're all trying to do our best. We're all trying to plan a path, but ultimately you can't plan everything. But understanding what you're good at, understanding what you can get good at, and what might be fulfilling for you can be really helpful in helping set the trajectory. And that's really rewarding for me to see when I'm working with students.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I guess, it's kind of this like nexus of, you do like teach at NYU, so like maybe bringing in the skills that you've garnered there and your experience, and just seeing like where is there just sort of this need and this gap right now, because I think that absolutely is just a crucial little kind of ingredient here, is sort of that security and having that kind of firm foundation to then kind of venture out and pursue any other sort of endeavor that people, in any kind of company they might want to start. So I think it's really good to, and I like that word, resiliency, kind of build the skills that are very resilient in terms of these, tumultuous times that we're in, of like stuff that's going to be really valuable. And obviously just the world is increasingly augmented and facilitated through various technologies and stuff like that. So just, like building those skills, building that awareness, and those things will just serve people well any which way that they, I guess, decide to go. Like it's not super limited, because I think like it makes me think of like it feels like I don't know what the right word is, but just like a more kind of democratic or more open than like a coding boot camp, because I feel like that's kind of just like, well, you're going for a very particular type of role if you're going through something like that, and this feels a little bit more broad, I guess, which could be very good, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, if you want to be a coder, that's a no-brainer. There's some very specific hard skills that you need to develop. Even then, I think some programs are better than others. For example, in letting you know what you need to do to be prepared for those types of conversations. You're still going to be a junior engineer. You're still going to be competing for roles against other software engineers. I think for a lot of people, though, they don't know necessarily what they want. And of course, the vision for the program that I'm creating is also to give them the hard skills and soft skills that they need in specific verticals. But the first step is awareness. And I think, we talked about entrepreneurialism a little bit earlier in the conversation, but it actually has a lot to do not only with higher education, but with how people navigate their careers, I think, in this sort of version of the life we're living now, right? I believe truly that you need to be much more entrepreneurial about how they navigate their careers, about how they find opportunities, which means building your network in the right way, which means adjusting your narrative to make sure that it fits the story that you want to create for yourself, which means developing skills in any way possible, even if that means on your own free time or working for somebody for free, so that you can then become marketable for the various industries that are being created right now as we speak, for the various positions and jobs that aren't even invented yet, because there's a lot of innovation continuing to happen at a much more rapid pace. And if you position yourself to have skills that can transfer across different industries, sectors, and roles, you're going to hedge against the risk of potentially losing your job down the line.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess really briefly, like if you want to talk about just both the the teaching that you do at NYU and the podcast, because I feel like for sure, you're teaching about entrepreneurship, and your podcast just seems to me like just a great kind of content creation kind of endeavor for you in terms of just talking about all this stuff, giving really great examples, doing these interviews and all that kind of stuff. So it's all sort of in the same space. But anything I guess you'd want to share just in terms about those things that you're currently doing as well, and kind of what they give you, and how the sort of the diversity of kind of different positions that you have, how they all kind of fit together, I guess, for you, maybe kind of feed off of each other.
Yeah, absolutely, Dustin. So, the very first thing that I did, I started to network and I started to meet people. And if you actually think about what we talked about earlier, which is when I transferred schools in my college career, it was the same path. I started exposing myself to new people. And whenever I get stuck in life, whenever I feel like there's no forward motion, what I do personally is I reach back out to people that I've been out of touch with, or I reach out to a bunch of new people that I want to build relationships with, and I just start setting up meetings. You have to think about the goal for those meetings, of course, but I just want to start talking to people to kind of reawaken and reinvigorate myself, but also to get more awareness. And that was the initial goal with the podcast. Is I was working with a lot of early stage entrepreneurs. I was giving similar feedback to them, and I decided that the best way for me to continue to learn is to learn from other entrepreneurs, other successful leaders and experts. So why not create a medium where you get to talk to them on a consistent basis and learn from them? And I called the show The Mentors, but what ended up happening inadvertently is all those guests that I have on my show, and I'm sure you have similar experiences, they became mentors to me, like micro mentors, where every week that I was interviewing somebody that did something interesting or tried something that I never even thought of trying, it created awareness within me that I didn't have before. And when you have that awareness, that's when you get ideas on businesses you can start, ideas on what career path you might take, ideas on creative endeavors like writing a book or what have you, right? And so I think the thread that's common across all these things is I'm constantly exposing myself to new people, partly because they have insight and they have an outlook on life that I simply cannot because I'm a different human. And that's something that's priceless to me is that interaction that I get to have and those nuggets of information that I get to pull out of people to see how they look at the world and to hopefully inform how I'll continue to look at the world, because that type of outlook constantly changes for every single person.
Yeah, definitely the networking component of podcasting is just an amazing aspect of it, where it's just like, I know I at least get something out of it, and just because of that, I know other people get something out of the conversations. But yeah, certainly just learning from other great people and keeping those creating those connections and keeping them going even after recording is really cool. So. But yeah, I guess we'll then just go in terms of all these things that you're doing. It's always the question I love to ask of just like, what are you geeking out about? If there's things that are, really grabbing your attention, of like things that you're reading or watching or listening to, or just sort of, hobbies that you have that you are kind of like personally meaningful for you, we can kind of keep it pretty open-ended there in whatever way, I guess, sort of resonates for you.
Yeah, because I've been doing the podcast now for a few years, and part of, as you know, with doing your own podcast, aside from finding guests, is also making sure that you're staying in tune with who your audience is and how you can find more of them, right? And so over the last few years, I realized that I need to be a marketer, and I started to geek out on marketing, actually, which is a pretty new discipline for me. I also started to geek out on writing. So, I write for a couple of publications. And before, I remember even growing up, I never thought of myself as a writer. I wasn't born in this country. I didn't learn English until I was about 9 years old. And of course, you doubt yourself during those times. And when kids were writing essays in schools, I always thought, oh, I'm never going to be a writer. That's just not me. I'm never going to get good at it. And that's just a label that I gave myself. I'm not a writer. I'm not a marketer, what have you. But then I've had to step into these roles in the last few years, and I realized they're deeply fulfilling in a lot of ways. So I started to geek out on these things, and I realized that you can absolutely reshape how you think about yourself, and we should always be thinking in those terms. In terms of hobbies, I was always a musician, and that's actually part of the reason why getting into podcasting was so easy for me, is because I already had all the recording equipment. I already knew how to use recording software, so it was literally a point of just hitting record in a different context. And so music is something that I still spend time on, trying to get a little bit better at the guitar. I've been taking guitar lessons since high school, and piano and the like. I would say that's probably, aside from my own entrepreneurial endeavors, which take up most of my time, that's probably my biggest hobby. And in terms of reading and the like, when I was younger and I was trying to progress in my career, and even though that's still obviously, I'm sure, a large goal of mine, and I'm sure a large goal for everybody as they go through life, I was consuming a lot of nonfiction because I thought, well, if you're going to be spending your time reading, you need to be learning. And for some reason, I told myself that nonfiction is the best way to learn. And it is, of course, an effective way to learn from other people that can package information in that way that is effective for you around particular topics like business philosophy, psychology, and the like. But I also realized in the last several years that not only do I really enjoy reading fiction, with fiction, writers are able to be a lot more creative. They can create their own worlds, and that can again enhance how you think, enhance how you look at the world as well. So in terms of reading, I've been actually exclusively reading fiction. I would say for at least the last 6 months, just because I find a lot of enjoyment from that.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, it's interesting to hear, because I feel like that's come up a little bit with a couple of past guests, is just sort of that negotiation between exclusively reading nonfiction and just sort of these like leadership books and all that stuff, which I think certainly have their place, but trying to get a little bit of a diversity in your diet, because I think it's just like if people are watching things like documentaries are kind of a nonfiction, and it's good to have those and a little bit of just fun entertainment or different things, because there certainly can still be a lot of learning and things happening with whatever it is that you're consuming. So
yeah, exactly. And actually, I want to correct myself. I shouldn't say exclusively reading fiction. I just started reading Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell, his new book, and I'm really enjoying it. And part of the reason why I want to correct myself is you don't have to exclusively do anything if you don't want to. Actually, I don't know if you know Naval. He's the founder of AngelList. He has his own podcast as well, a really prolific thinker. One of the things he kind of opened up my eyes to is there's so many books out there. There's so much content out there to consume that can have value to your life. You don't have to finish whatever book you're on, even though maybe growing up we're kind of taught that we should. And so that's another thing. If you like fiction, great. If you like nonfiction, great. Whatever is adding value to you right now is what you should be doing and spending your time on.
Right. Yeah, that happens for me a lot with because I definitely watch a lot more TV shows and stuff like that. So there's kind of that, that sunken cost sort of theory. It's well, I've already, watched 2 seasons. There's 3 more seasons. I should just keep on going or whatever, But it's are you do you enjoy watching this show? Just go do something else. Don't torture yourself watching multiple 22 episode seasons of a show where you're just well, I don't know, it's fine. Same goes for a book. It's hey, if you feel like you're getting something out of it, keep with it. But if it's not, hitting for you. And I guess that's also the idea of trying to just get books cheaply, or going to your library and those sort of things. It's do something kind of low commitment, and you can sort of pick and choose if you're gonna just maybe skim through something, or maybe skip ahead to things that seem relevant, or just put it down if it doesn't help. But because that's the idea, you can kind of hop around and get a lot of different points of view, whether they're nonfiction or fiction. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, look, at the same time, right now, for example, a lot of people are raving about Tiger King, right? Because we're all at home and there's nothing to do, and they're watching these random shows, and this one hit popularity. But guess what? I mean, maybe I haven't seen the show, so I'm not going to judge it either way. But what I do know is it's creating a lot of conversation. It's giving people an excuse to maybe talk about this topic with people they haven't talked to in a while, right? Or develop a bond with someone over this topic, and that's highly valuable as well. So if you feel like watching those 22 episodes, because you get to discuss it with your family afterwards or your friends, and it sparks conversation that then changes into something else, that sounds pretty valuable to me as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so, I'm kind of wondering if people would have watched that if they weren't just stuck at home. But that's the other thing too. Something like that, you're oh, I gotta watch it because everybody else is. But then you start it and you're I don't like this. It's you don't have to watch it. You don't have to do anything. Right. You don't have to do anything you don't want to.
So far, I've refrained. Yeah. So I'm staying strong.
And it's it'll be there. Whenever you want to, if you want to watch something else right now, go for then Tiger King will be there. But well, I guess then on that, anything specific that you'd really want to recommend, maybe some kind of go-to classics for you, or you mentioned we'll link out to that it's his most recent work, Malcolm Gladwell's book, Talking to Strangers. But anything else that like I said, you're consuming right now that you'd want to give kind of a specific tip of the hat to, or some go-to classics that you want to make sure to give a shout out to?
Sure. I'll focus on the latter. I don't know if they're classics. They're classics for me. And whenever somebody asks me for book recommendations, I list these 3 books, because if you haven't read those, I feel like they can be incredibly valuable. One, I'm sure you've heard of almost all of them. One is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. That completely shifted my thinking when I first read it in my early 20s about how to think about human relationships. And how to put others first, and what others care about first in furthering relationships. It's incredibly eye-opening, and it's also one of those books that you can pick up anytime. I've reread different parts of it several times in my life, and you could read it piecemeal. You can start right in the middle of the book, and it still makes sense. So I definitely recommend that book. Another book that was critical for me to read, just because I love entrepreneurial stories, is Richard Branson's first book, Losing My Virginity. And his story is just so incredible. He's one of those people, if you're interested in entrepreneurship, he's one of those people that just from a very young age. He was about 17 years old when he started working on his first venture, and he closed deals, advertising deals for a student magazine with Coke and Pepsi, something that no 17-year-old now even does, let alone back then. So his whole story and trajectory is just incredibly inspiring. And if you want something that'll motivate you to act on something, that's a great book to read. And it's just also fun. He's kind of like James Bond. And then the most recent book that I read that was incredibly impactful to me was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Have you read that book?
I have not.
I encourage you to pick it up. Actually, maybe I would say hold off, just because the first half of the book takes place in concentration camps in Germany, and it's pretty depressing, obviously. And so right now, if you're finding it difficult because we're all in kind of an isolation, then maybe it's going to be obviously a bit negative for you. But that book really helped me think about what humans are capable of in extreme duress and extremely difficult times. And half the book is a very short book, so you can read it literally in a couple of days. But half the book is about how he got through those times in concentration camps because of a North Star that he had, which I won't spoil, but basically something that had deep meaning for him. And then the next half of the book talks about logotherapy and his Viktor Frankl's version of therapy that he provided to people to get through incredibly difficult moments. So actually, in some ways, maybe the book is timely to read right now, but be ready to read some difficult passages. But again, another one of these books that kind of put things in perspective for me personally, and I now recommend to almost everybody. But I do give that disclaimer that you do have to get through some difficult chapters in that book, but it is incredibly, it's definitely worth it.
Good disclaimer, because I think just like if you're reading it right now, like kind of tread carefully, I guess, or just like maybe not also like the best like beach read or something. Like it's not like it's pretty deep, but like very meaningful. So it's like that feels like a good cozying up next to like your fireplace kind of book or something where you're just like, nothing else is going on. I just want to like plug in and think about nothing else for, other than what this book is telling me. Yeah, that's a good one. I feel I'll just add it to my wish list. Cause I always just like, if people do it, it's like, I'm going to put it on there. Cause then I'm like, hey, I need a new book. And I have all these ones just kind of sitting, waiting for me. So yeah,
that is a good one to prioritize. I actually read it on the beach.
Really? Oh, okay. Yeah. I just figured it like doesn't seem like a light boat where you're just like, oh, it's like the waves or whatever. But if it's like, hey, if you're just wanting to sit and read, I'm sure that's going to be very captivating.
I think I needed that juxtaposition, to have the beach in front of me. That's like a nice, refreshing, wow, life is worth living type of thing. And then, and also have this book with me that actually had a very similar message, just through a very different lens. But I don't know, that worked for me. That setting worked for me. But I'm sure sitting in front of your fireplace or in your reading nook, it can be a good place as well.
Yeah, that's funny. Because a lot of people I know, they just go for like a trashy magazine or something when you're at the beach or whatever. But it could also be like, yeah, if you're in this sort of like relaxed, sort of like peaceful beach or whatever, and you're just very at ease, and it's like, okay, yeah, I'm just gonna relax. Because I think for me, like, it's always hard reading like really dense books, because my brain is just always like thinking of things or whatever. Like it's hard for it to just like slow down and sit with a book. So I do like the ones that are like shorter or kind of like pretty, kind of I know like the chapters are maybe like short because they're just sort of like brief little essays or vignettes or something. So sometimes it's just like I can just like pick it up, put it down, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think with some books, actually, audiobook format is really. I do both. I mean, I read physical books, I read ebooks, and I listen to audiobooks sometimes too. And it's a good way to mix it up. I think some books are actually meant to be consumed through audio format. Like literally listening to the narrator is a better way to read that book than to read it yourself. I know I read this book Ender's Game that was actually made for audio first. A lot of people don't know, and eventually it got turned into a movie. And so yeah, there's just certain books that I think should be listened to audio. So don't feel guilty if you want to listen to the book as well.
Yeah, that's so weird thing for me. As much as I love podcasts and listen to so many, I have not broken into audiobooks, but I feel like it's just a matter of time. Well, again, that's a subject, I guess, too. I've just like, you mentioned all these kind of go-to books and everything. Anything else just like that you listen to, like any other podcasts or anything else, I guess, like that you'd want to kind of give a tip of the hat to that we can include before we wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think right now we all need something lighthearted, and I actually started listening to Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard, actually about a year ago now, I think. And I think that's a really cool podcast because he sits down with some awesome guests and has a very refreshing, lightweight conversation, but also gets serious a lot of times. And so you get to hear a lot about a lot of people's backgrounds that you wouldn't have otherwise, and kind of be a fly on the wall. I think that's a cool lightweight podcast. I personally listen to The Daily, the New York Times podcast, a lot of days. I will say, though, be ready now for it to be a pretty sad listen every day. So it's one of those things, actually, I would say listen to it if you want to get informed, because I feel like they try to have relatively objective conversations, but also do limit your intake with some of the stuff like the news today anyways, just because if you overload on that stuff, then you can kind of get tunnel vision. And then if I really want to nerd out, I listen to Econ Talk, which I don't know if you've heard. It's with I believe Russ Roberts is the guy, and he gets into some deep sort of conversations about, I guess some of them are psychological, some of them are a little bit more with a bent on sort of human nature and society and how they function. And if you want to get something that's highly academic, yes, I'm a professor, but I would say I'm kind of I'm not what I was a practitioner first and became a professor later. So
Right.
I'm by no means an academic. And sometimes I like to hear from other academics just to hear how they think and how maybe I was supposed to be, but didn't end up being.
Yeah, because I think the most I get into sort of like that econ stuff, if it's just sort of like, because I think that of like very deep philosophical and like psychological things in terms of how people kind of live and do all these things. Like I listen to Planet Money, which is a very pretty quick and lighthearted look at things in the economy. I think it's a very it's very thoughtful. Like it gives a good context for things that are happening, but done with a lighter tone. But yeah, because I think that it is, I think, probably tough for some people, to kind of break into the very like wonky or very academic, research driven point of view. If it's kind of like I don't know, overly so. All things in moderation, so.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, actually, the Econ Talk one that I mentioned, I think he tries to make it as relatable as possible. I've listened to other podcasts where, sometimes the host does a good job of that. Sometimes it just depends on the guest, and sometimes I just turn it off. Right? I mean, if it gets to be a little bit too much, maybe I'll listen to the part of the podcast or whatever the content is that's interesting or valuable to me, and then I switch to something else. But I would say nowadays my go-tos are I try to keep the audio content. Since I'm not really commuting at all anymore, I'm really only listening to it when I cook, for example, or I'm cleaning. I try to keep it lightweight, so Armchair Expert's been my go-to.
Yeah. But I think that's probably the biggest like moral of this episode is sort of like, hey, if it's not like bringing you joy, if it's not valuable or relevant to you, like you don't have to listen, just put it down, like turn it off, whatever, because that's like definitely just like a mental health thing. Because if you're like, no, I have to keep listening to this really long podcast about a thing that I'm like not interested in or is like confusing me and I'm getting like worked up or whatever, or just like spending time on a book that you're not interested in and then you don't have time for other stuff that you might want to do or whatever. So I think it's a really good lesson. It's a good takeaway for people. So
exactly. No, you should try to. Well, I just used the word "should," but what I was gonna say is you should. It's more helpful if you try to remove your should thinking and or at the very least translate into want thinking. And that's difficult for a lot of people to do because we constantly guilt trip ourselves over things. But yes, in terms of your mental health, if you could try to translate that into from should think into something else, it's just going to be a lot easier on you, and it'll help you look at things through a different lens. You might still be looking at the same thing or the same fact, like the same goal that you need to accomplish, for example, but think about it from the perspective of why do I want to do this as opposed to why should I do this? And oftentimes it'll help you figure out the next step that you need to take.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good thing. And certainly kind of not expecting perfection from yourself or anybody else. It's like, you like caught yourself kind of, just like saying it of like, those sort of things. But yeah, it can help you, I guess, figure out where best to, if you're making a decision of where to put your energy, you can, do that in a more thoughtful way. But also, like for me, I kind of a similar sort of thing is like you said, like you could be examining a thing that you have to do, but it is thinking about it rather like as an opportunity versus an obligation, where it's like, if you have to do a thing and you're like, oh, it's like an obligation or whatever, it's like, no, this isn't like an opportunity for me to spend time with my family and have some like, quality time and, all those sort of things and bond, versus it being just sort of this like obligation, you're sort of, dragging your feet or whatever. So it's, like I want to do this. This is like an opportunity. This is great, so maybe think of that. Yeah. I kind of like, try to put that in my head sometimes. So.
Oh, no, absolutely. And one thing that recently I've been doing is to speak to a little bit on the obligation side of things is I've realized that if I have an obligation, it's usually because I created it for myself. There was some kind of action that I did in the past that set myself up to have this obligation. And if I talked to my past self, I would have wanted that obligation, right? That's not always the case, of course, but usually it's something that I was working towards anyways. So, remember to try to be in the present and realize that this is something you were working towards anyways, most likely. And so the best way to get through it is to be present and to just do the work, or to actually get through the obligation. I just read the book. One more book I'll mention is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and I think that's a great. That's actually another one that I'm glad that I'm leaving on, is because it really helps you think about how to get the most out of the present moment and try not to live in the past or in the pursuit of the future too much. So The Power of Now actually is something that is nonfiction that I read relatively recently, and it definitely shifted my thinking as well. But it speaks to what we were just talking about in a good way.
Yeah, and I think that is actually just for the sake of time and just it's a beautiful place to end the episode. Is like a great sort of package of different ways to kind of I don't know, just come at each day and be able to just be really thoughtful and intentional and really present with the decisions that you make and sort of like the things that you have to do and all that. So I really like that. So thank you so much for all that you shared and all the good stuff that we'll be having in the show notes for this episode, and we'll have ways to connect with you as well. So again, thank you so much for your time, and just best of luck with everything.
Yeah, Dustin, I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me on the show. I think it's great to be able to have a conversation like this, and so I'm looking forward to being a listener of your podcast. And I'll just add really quickly in the end here, if people do want to reach me and you're listening right now, it sounds like it's going to be in the show notes, but school16.co.co or thementors.co. I love those CO domains. My email is really easy to guess. It's just my first name at those URLs.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll have all that just in case people if they don't have to jot it down. We'll have those absolutely in the show notes. And just thank you so much for making yourself available and doing all the work that you're doing. And really great to talk to you. So just have a good rest of your day.
Absolutely. You too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast.